Now we are going to see a demonstration on the Clari5 Enterprise Fraud Management Solution, where we are going to simulate a typical fraud typology, see how the Clari5 system responds to the fraud that is happening by detecting and preventing the fraud, as well as generating alerts in the real time in the case management system, and see how the investigator would go through the entire process of investigation of the manual alerts that have been created. So what we see here on the screen is a typical fraud typology of zone hopping or geo hopping, which is multiple card transaction happening across different geographies within a very short duration of time. Also referring to real-time card fraud prevention scenario, where we are going to see how Clari5 prevents the fraud that is happening. So in the particular story, we have a card which has been stolen by fraudsters and cloned into multiple cards, taken up by these fraudsters to various locations like UK and India, and that's where they're trying to do transactions at those different ATMs in a very short period of time. So there's a first transaction that is happening via the cloned card from an ATM in UK. That's where Clari5 will get all the data from the transaction related event from the card processing system. In another span of, let's say, 5 minutes, we see there's another transaction happening from the same card, but from a different ATM that is situated in India. And that is happening in a very short period of time. So Clari5, while ingesting these transaction-related data, understand that this kind of fraud is not a genuine case that is happening by a customer. And with respect to the mechanisms of real-time decisioning, it declines a transaction by giving the risk advice as decline to the card processing system. That's where parallelly alert is also created in the case management system for investigation. So I'll move on to the simulator, where we'll use a POS simulator to showcase this kind of fraud. So first, in my POS simulator, I'll key in some card related details, a card ID. Now we'll key in the details of the device, the customer, the merchant from where merchant or POS ID or terminal ID from where the ATM transaction is happening. Also given the details of the debit account and the location here being UK. Finally giving an available balance and an MC code and giving an amount for transaction. So at this moment we see the first transaction has been successfully completed, where Clari5 understand this is an actual or realistic transaction that is happening. So now I'm going to replicate the second transaction that is going to happen from a different location, different merchant or different ATM terminal, and from the location in India. I'll change the MCC code as well and give a certain amount value. So now the moment I pressed enter, we see the transaction has been declined. So this is the kind of capability that exists with Clari5, how fast it identifies the fraud that is happening, and based on the risk advice that has been set for that kind of scenario, it has declined the scenario in that particular instant. This is a kind of real-time fraud prevention capability that Clari5 has. So now we jump into the case management system and see the alert that has been created and how the investigator would investigate on the entire alerts and cases that have been created. What we see here is the actual case management system and the landing page of this particular area, which consists of a dashboard. So here a dashboard would consist of various widgets, various dashlets, which tell some kind of high-level information regarding the alerts and scenarios that are maintained inside the case management system. So it could be the purpose of a supervisor, the head of fraud risk management division, an analyst. Accordingly, they'll see some dashlets on this page, which will be talking about the status-wise alert allocation of the alerts, meaning the productivity of the team. So supervisor might be interested in seeing what is the productivity of its team, how many alerts are in the created state, in the closed state, in the intermediary states. There's a graph which depicts all the kind of information. Audit graph which talks about how many alerts are being created in a particular scenario. Since there are multiple scenarios inside with respect to each of the solutions, we have number of alerts that have been created for a particular scenario and so on, right? Post which we can also have more dashlets which talk about other kind of details, other kind of alerts saying these are the latest alerts for today, they are the latest core banking alerts or the latest internet banking or credit card alerts or the latest or any kind of high false positive alerts, any kind of high priority alerts and so on. This kind of dashboard is there where we see the entire dashboarding functionality to manage what dashlets we see here, what are the order of dashlets, who is this particular dashboard accessible to. Multiple dashboards can be maintained here from the Manage Dashboards button. So since we created that alert in the real time, let's go ahead and see what is the alert that has been recently created. So we see the latest credit card alerts here. So I'll just open this particular alert. Now on this screen, what you see here are some case details as well as some alert details. So every alert that you see in the case management system will have case details on the top, since every alert will be mapped to a parent ID, which is the case ID, and cases are created based on the similar entities, which here in this case was the payment card, which it seemed to be fraudulent or suspicious in the case. So this is the payment card which was cloned. We see other details of the case like the status of the case, like created, who's been assigned to, the timestamp. Moving on, we see other details related to the alert, which was the actual set of fraud or actual set of transactions happening from different geographies in a short time. The scenario or the fact name is what comes from the Clari5 scenario authoring tool, depicting how the scenario has been written for the investigator to understand what the fraud is all about. This is also something which is captured here in the summary, where we can see that multiple ATMs withdrawals in different locations from one account is happening in a short span of time. More other details regarding the alert is also here, like alert score, risk level, which is high here, who's been assigned to, the status of the alert, the entity for which the alert has been created, anything more on the timestamp, if there's any indication of fraud that comes once the particular case has been closed. The other set of information which is very important for the investigator to understand on what kind of fraud has happened besides the actual fraud in summary is the evidence. That is a set of transactions that have happened which has led to the triggering of the alert and declining of the case. So as part of the evidence details, we see triggers for evidence where there are two transactions which have happened from different countries like India and UK, and the two transactions where the second transaction has been highlighted saying the second transaction happening from India was detected as a fraudulent one and for which the risk advice of decline was sent back to the source system. So this is where you see the highlighted transaction and more such details, which again come as a configurable area where you can see more details accordingly that can be fetched from the card processing system or the card transaction event. And accordingly, the primary and secondary actions given by the Clari5 engine, which were to decline the transaction, create a case parallelly. As part of the transaction that we see here, there are also some investigation inputs that each of the investigator can give. Is by verifying each of the transaction as fraudulent, non-fraudulent, suspicious or non-suspicious according to the labeling that we give. And once, let's say, the customer has confirmed from the customer by via email or via calling up that this is a transaction which has not been done by them, but instead a suspicious one, we verify that this transaction is a fraudulent one and we confirm it. This fraud marking again has been mapped across the transaction details or the evidence details here. As part of other investigation areas, we also have the audit history or the activity details where we see other areas like creating any kind of investigation notes, adding any kind of comments, for example, investigating the case has customer is genuine, card is fraudulent, right? And we add the comment, add any kind of further attachments that need to be there, and all of this will come as part of the audit history, whatever actions have been done by any of the users here. That we see here, the system has created the alert here, an event has been marked as verified by the user who's logged in, the comment has been added by the user, and the comment is visible here. There are likely multiple kinds of actions that the investigator can do. Post this, there are also some AIML indicators as part of the alert details which tell around what is the probability of this alert being a false positive. So these kind of indicators fetch the data from the AIML models, the AIML machines, and get the score here from the past details, past transaction and alert data, giving the score here saying that there's only 1% chance of this alert being a false positive. So accordingly, the investigator can understand that this is actually a genuine fraud that has happened and not a false positive, and therefore they should be investigating the case. However, if this value could have come out to be greater than 80 or 90, that's where, or greater than 60, 70, that's where the investigator would understand that it is a false positive and likely should not be taking up the case and save their precious time on the alert investigation. Likewise, there'll be more AML indicators indicating a fraud score, which tells the gravity of fraud that is happening in this case. So higher the value, higher the gravity of fraud happening in the case. And similarly, a suspicious entity score, which is depicting what is the suspiciousness of the entity involved here. Once investigators completed their own transaction, their own verification of transactions, any kind of to and fro communication with other users of the case management system, and finally come to a conclusion, that's where they can transition this particular alert to the next set of for the next set of actions, either to request for clarification from other users like branch users for inbox, or finally go ahead and close the case. Uh, Based on the investigation analysis that has been done by investigator, they can mention if there's any indication of fraud here by clicking on the radio buttons of yes or no. Accordingly, if there's no indication of fraud, this particular alert can be suppressed for a certain duration for that customer so that there's no more alert for the next few days or hours as mentioned here. So for example, if the customer said that this is a genuine transaction done by them and they were traveling, that's why we see two different transactions happening from different geographies in a very short period of time. That's why we can mention the customer does not want to see more alerts regarding this kind of transaction as they're traveling for the next 4 days, and we can mention that and show them there's no indication of fraud. Otherwise, we can simply say that there has been an indication of fraud and would like to close the alert at this moment. So this is how we close the case finally for any of the alerts that have been generated in the case management system, and the entire process how the transaction marking should be done by the investigator, any kind of comments to be added, any kind of evidence needs to be checked, and finally dealing with the closure of the case based on indication of fraud.